Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The illicit market in Xylon's eastern sector operated from the hollowed-out remains of a passenger cruiser. Jake limped through the cramped corridors, a sack of salvaged components slung over his shoulder. His knee throbbed, an old military injury that flared up in Xylon's fluctuating atmospheric pressure. With each step, the joint ground like poorly meshed gears, a constant reminder of what he'd lost. Corso waited at his usual spot, a makeshift counter assembled from flight console fragments. The Rigelian trader's six-fingered hands deftly sorted through Jake's findings, his expression growing increasingly unimpressed. "This neuro relay is barely functional," Corso said, holding the component up to the dim light. "And these circuit boards, corroded beyond repair." He pushed most of the items back across the counter. "I'll give you 50 credits for the lot." "That's less than a quarter of what they're worth," Jake protested. Corso's multiple pupils contracted into threatening pinpoints. "You still owe me for that oxygen filter, Jake. 300 credits plus interest." He leaned forward, his breath reeking of fermented algae. "You've got one more cycle to find something worthwhile, or I take your ship. And we both know that without a ship on Xylon, you're just meat for the sandworms." Jake swallowed hard, pocketing the meager payment. His ship, a patched-together salvage vessel he'd named Second Chance, was the only thing keeping him alive on this wasteland of a planet. Losing it meant death. "I'll find something," he promised, the words hollow even to his own ears. "See that you do?" Corso replied, already turning his attention to another scavenger. Back in his ship, Jake stared at the navigation console. The smart choice was to head to the western sector, where competition among scavengers was fierce, but finds were more common. Instead, his finger hovered over the coordinates for the northern Badlands. Unexplored, dangerous, but potentially lucrative. "One last desperate gamble," he muttered to himself, punching in the coordinates. Hours later, Jake's scanner shrieked, a harsh, demanding sound in the dead silence of a shattered cruiser deep in the Badlands. He froze, finger hovering over the mute button. Sound on Xylon meant death, but this wasn't a predator's signature. This was a life support signal. Active technology in a graveyard of dead starships. "Damn it," he whispered. The smart play was to walk away. But 10 years as a military medic had burned the intelligence out of him, leaving only a rescuer's instinct. He moved toward the signal like a man walking to his sentencing. Jake stared at the readout, his fingers tightening around the device. He should ignore it. The smart play was always to avoid complications. Yet something stirred within him, a reflex he thought he'd buried along with his comrades years ago. The instinct to save, not salvage. "Damn it," he whispered, adjusting his course. The signal led him to an elite warrior-class shuttle, impaled into the cruiser's deck like a ceremonial dagger through the heart of a sacrificial beast. The shuttle's architecture was alien, all sharp angles and gleaming surfaces despite the damage it had sustained. Jake recognized the design from military briefings. Steel Wind Clan. Dangerous, territorial, lethal. He squeezed through a partially melted doorway, ducking as a shower of sparks erupted from a damaged control panel. Emergency lights pulsed in a slow, rhythmic pattern, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. And there she was. A blue-skinned woman lay in the pilot's seat, her body arranged in a deliberately ceremonial pose. Her eyes were closed, her breathing imperceptible. Ritual blades of an unknown alloy were scattered around her in a precise pattern. Not dropped in chaos, but placed with mathematical precision. Her features were sharp and proud even in unconsciousness, her musculature clearly visible beneath the armor that seemed more like a second skin than clothing. Jake approached cautiously, scanner in hand. The readings were bizarre. Her vital signs registered just above statistical error, as though she existed in some state between life and death. His medic's training identified the pattern. Not injury, but induced stasis. Ritualistic, deliberate. "Hello?" he called, though he expected no response. "Can you hear me?" He reached out, hesitating before touching her cold blue skin. Something about the silent warrior affected him deeply. No one should die alone in the cold emptiness of space, abandoned and forgotten. Without fully understanding his own actions, Jake leaned down. His lips brushed gently against her forehead. A gesture of compassion, a farewell to a stranger he couldn't save. Her eyes snapped open. They weren't the eyes of someone at death's door. They were the eyes of a predator awakened, ancient, cold, and filled with a fury that transcended language. Before Jake could regain his balance, the warrior sat up with explosive force, the movement hurling him against the opposite wall of the shuttle. Pain flared across his back as he struggled to breathe. The blue-skinned woman stood now, her movements fluid and controlled despite her apparent hibernation. She unsheathed a blade from her belt with practiced precision. "What have you done, outsider?" Her voice scraped through the air like metal grinding against metal, each word delivered with the authority of one accustomed to unquestioned obedience. Jake raised his hands. "Thought you were dying. Tried to help." She advanced on him, blade catching emergency lights. "You violated the ritual of silence." Before she could elaborate, engines rumbled through the shuttle's hull. The woman's expression shifted to alarm. "Too late," she hissed. A massive shadow darkened the breach in the shuttle's hull. Another blue-skinned warrior stood there, his form eclipsing the dim light from outside. Where the woman was sleek and lithe, this newcomer was a mountain of muscle and metal. His armor seemed to have grown into his flesh. Blue skin and silver alloy fused into a grotesque hybrid. Ritual scars covered his exposed skin, each one raised and deliberate, telling stories of battles won and enemies destroyed. "Sai," the newcomer rumbled, his voice an avalanche of malicious amusement. "Your sacred ritual of silence, interrupted by a worthless human?" His laughter echoed against the metal walls. "Father always said your softness would be the clan's undoing." He was right. The woman, Zai, straightened, her grip tightening on her blade. "Malakosh," she acknowledged, hatred dripping from the name. "Speak of my father again, and I'll carve the memory of him from your tongue." Malakosh's gaze fell on Jake, dismissive and calculating. "According to the ancient law, I can now challenge not you, but your chosen one." His smile widened, revealing teeth filed to points. 3 solar cycles, human. I'll start with your legs so your new mistress can watch her honor break slowly. Zai stepped forward, rigid with rage. "He is not—" "The law's clear," Malakosh cut her off. "He woke you from the ritual. Challenger or consort? No third path." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. "Listen, there's been a misunderstanding." Zai silenced him with a look of such concentrated contempt that Jake physically recoiled. Her expression communicated clearly that he was less than nothing, an insect that had blundered into a work of art, destroying its value. "You are my shame, human," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And you will die. But you will die by my hand when I decide, not for his entertainment." In a single fluid motion, she spun and fired a weapon Jake hadn't noticed at her hip. A blast of energy tore through a side panel of the shuttle, creating a new exit. Before Jake could protest, she grabbed his arm with bruising force and dragged him toward the opening. "Run," she commanded, "or die where you stand." The labyrinth of the starship graveyard swallowed them as Malakush's laughter followed like a curse. They sprinted through the twisted corridors of the cruiser, the sounds of pursuit growing behind them. Zai moved with fluid grace while Jake struggled to keep pace, his knees sending spikes of pain with each step. "This way," Zai hissed, pulling him toward what had once been a cargo bay. They emerged onto a nightmare landscape. The bay's floor had collapsed, creating a chasm 30 meters across. The only path forward was a narrow structural beam, barely wider than Jake's foot. Below, the broken remnants of cargo containers created a lethal field of jagged metal. "We cannot go back," Zai said, eyeing the beam. Without hesitation, she stepped onto it, her balance perfect as she began crossing. Jake stared at the narrow bridge in dismay. "I can't, my knee—" Zai turned, her face a mask of contempt. "Then die here, human." But as she took another step, the entire ship groaned. The beam shuddered as the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. One moment they were being pulled down with crushing force. The next they were in 0G, floating momentarily before gravity reasserted itself. Zai nearly lost her balance but managed to crouch low on the beam. "The gravity generators are malfunctioning," she growled. Jake's mind raced, analyzing the pattern of the fluctuations. He noticed the emergency lights dimming just before each gravity shift. "The power grid is cycling," he realized aloud. "The system is trying to maintain life support by redirecting power. There's a pattern. 3 seconds normal gravity, 2 seconds heavy, 1 second zero." Zai looked at him with narrowed eyes. "You can predict it?" I think so. Jake watched the lights dim once more. Now, heavy gravity in 3, 2, 1. The pull increased dramatically, driving them both downward. The beam creaked ominously. 0 gravity in 2, 1. They were suddenly weightless. Zai reacted instantly, pushing off the beam and floating toward Jake. She grabbed his arm. When I say now, push with your good leg, she commanded. Jake nodded, understanding her plan. When the 0G phase hit again, they would use it to cross the chasm. Ready, she said as the gravity began to fluctuate again. Now! Jake pushed off with all his strength as Zai pulled him forward. They floated across the gap in the momentary weightlessness, their bodies working in perfect synchronization despite their mutual distrust. As gravity began to return, they tumbled onto the far side of the chasm, rolling to absorb the impact. For a moment they lay side by side, breathing hard. Jake noticed that Zai's hand was still gripping his arm, not to restrain him now, but in the unconscious way of someone who had just shared mortal danger. She seemed to realize this at the same moment and abruptly released him, rising to her feet. Come, she said, her voice carefully neutral. The engine room is ahead. We can hide there. You need to explain what's happening, Jake said, breaking the tense silence. Zai turned to him, her expression unreadable. You have destroyed everything. I was trying to help you. Help? She spat the word. I am Zai, daughter of Krovash, rightful leader of the Steel Wind clan. I entered the ritual of silence to prepare for combat with Malakosh, who murdered my father. Her eyes narrowed. And now, because of you, I cannot face him directly. Jake stood, wincing as his knee protested. I didn't know. Ignorance is no defense, she replied. By waking me with that gesture, you have triggered an ancient law. You are now seen as either my challenger or my chosen consort. Malakosh will face you instead of me. And if I refuse to fight? Zai's laugh was sharp and without humor. Then you die without honor, and I lose my claim to leadership forever. She approached him, studying him with clinical detachment. Can you fight, human? My name is Jake, he said. And no, not the way you mean. I was a medic, not a soldier. Zai closed her eyes briefly, as though summoning patience from some hidden reserve. Then I must teach you. We have 3 solar cycles. What followed was not merely a lesson in combat. Shai handed him one of her ritual blades, a curved weapon that felt unwieldy and dangerous in his unpracticed grip. She demonstrated basic stances and strikes, her movements liquid and precise. When Jake attempted to mimic her, the results were disastrous. No, she snarled after his 5th failed attempt to parry her strike. Your grip is wrong. Your balance is wrong. Your instinct is wrong. Her frustration radiated from her like heat. You are no warrior. You are not even prey. You are just an obstacle. Jake threw the blade down, the metal clattering against the deck plates. This isn't working. Coward, Zai spat, retrieving the weapon in one fluid motion. You doom us both. Jake's jaw tightened. Without a word, he limped to a pile of debris in the corner. He began sorting through twisted metal, selecting pieces with specific shapes and weights. What are you doing? Zai demanded. We have no time for... Watch, Jake interrupted. He positioned a length of pipe against a turbine housing, balancing it at a precise angle. Attack me. Zai blinked, momentarily thrown by the command. You have no weapon. Attack me, he repeated, standing in an open space between 2 rusted conduits. With a shrug of disdain, Zai lunged forward, her blade arcing toward his shoulder. Not to kill, merely to teach. Jake sidestepped, his movement clumsy but deliberate. As he moved, his foot caught a nearly invisible wire he'd strung moments earlier. The pipe he'd balanced toppled, rolling directly into Zai's path. She stumbled, caught off guard by the unexpected obstacle. Before she could recover, Jake pressed a panel on the wall. A maintenance hatch swung open, blocking her next advance. In 3 seconds, he'd created 2 barriers between them using only the environment. Again, Jake said, his breathing slightly labored, but his eyes bright with purpose. Zai's expression shifted from contempt to curiosity. She circled around the obstacles, approaching from a new angle. This time, Jake retreated toward a specific section of flooring. As Zai stepped forward, the metal beneath her foot tilted slightly, Another of Jake's quick modifications. Not enough to make her fall, just enough to disrupt her perfect balance. Your combat is a dance, Jake explained, using the moment to position himself behind a partially collapsed support beam. Mine is problem solving. He gestured around them. You try to defeat your opponent. I try to defeat the situation. Sai studied him, reassessing. Without warning, she threw her blade. It whistled past Jake's ear, embedding itself in the wall behind him. And when your traps fail? She asked. Jake tapped a bundle of wires he'd exposed near his position. Then I create new ones. He pulled a coupling loose, and a shower of sparks erupted between them, temporarily blinding Zai. When her vision cleared, Jake stood beside her, holding her own blade to her side. She hadn't even heard him move. For the first time, a flicker of respect showed in her eyes. She took the blade from his hand. Perhaps there was more than one way to fight. Jake nodded toward the makeshift traps he'd created in mere minutes. Malakosh is stronger than me, faster, better trained. I'd be dead in seconds in a fair fight. So you propose to fight unfairly? There was less judgment in her voice now, more tactical assessment. Jake smiled grimly. I propose to win. Zai nodded. Decision made. Show me more of these. Problems you solve. They sat in silence, the soft hum of the regulator the only sound besides their breathing. Jake noticed Zai absently tracing a pattern on her forearm, her fingers moving over a series of raised markings that formed an intricate design. Battle scar? He asked, nodding toward the markings. Zai glanced up, startled from her thoughts. Her hands stilled. For a moment, Jake thought she would ignore him. Then she extended her arm slightly, allowing him to see the pattern more clearly. An intricate series of geometric shapes etched into her blue skin. Krishar, she said, coming of age mark. Jake studied the pattern, recognizing the craftsmanship. Beautiful work. Zai's fingers resumed their tracing, but slower now, more deliberate. My father's hand. Her voice softened, almost imperceptibly. The final day of my trial of ascension. She fell silent, lost in memory. Then, as if making a decision, she stood and moved to the viewport. He believed a true leader protects, not destroys. Her profile was sharp against the dim starlight. Malakosh called it weakness. Jake approached carefully, stopping at a respectful distance. What happened to him? Hunting accident. The words were flat, disbelieving. His safety tether failed on the razorback cliffs. She turned to face Jake, her eyes hard. My father checked his equipment 3 times before every climb. Always. Without another word, she pulled aside a section of her armor, revealing a long, partially healed scar along her ribs. Training accident. With Malakosh, she let the armor fall back into place. The next day, my father died. The implication hung between them, clear as crystal. Jake reached into his pack and withdrew a small, battered datapad. Its screen flickered to life, revealing a woman in a medical uniform. Auburn hair, laughing eyes. Sai studied the image. Your mate? Jake nodded. Elara. His thumb brushed the edge of the screen in an unconscious gesture. Combat medic. Corelli conflict. She fell in battle? Jake's expression tightened. Bad intel. Walked into an ambush. He tapped his damaged knee. Same mission. Sai tilted her head, genuine curiosity in her voice. Why keep an image of the dead? Reminds me, Jake said simply, that I was someone before all this. He gestured vaguely to encompass their surroundings, his current existence. Someone who saved lives instead of scavenging them. Zai considered this, her face unreadable. Then she reached out, one finger hovering over the image without touching it. She had a warrior's eyes, she observed. Clear, determined. It wasn't sympathy or even understanding exactly, but it was acknowledgement of his loss, of the weight he carried. Coming from Sai, it felt significant. Rest, she said finally, turning away. Tomorrow will test us both. Jake nodded, tucking the datapad away. Good night, Zai. She paused, hearing her name from his lips for the first time. She didn't respond, but her shoulders relaxed a fraction as she moved to her makeshift bedroll. They continued training as the artificial day cycle of the planet gave way to night. The temperature dropped precipitously, the metal walls of the hall conducting cold like a living thing. Jake shivered, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. As Jake demonstrated how to rig a simple trap using tension from a bent metal rod, He accidentally bumped against Zai's side. She flinched, her hand instinctively going to her ribs. The warrior mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of pain. Jake's medic instincts took over. "You're injured." "It's nothing," she said, the mask firmly back in place. "Let me see." "We don't have time for human weakness." "It's not weakness to maintain your fighting capability," Jake countered. "Even machines need maintenance." The argument seemed to reach her. Reluctantly, Zai allowed him to examine a long, partially healed wound along her ribcage. It was an old injury, but recently aggravated. "Malakosh?" Jake asked quietly. Zai's eyes darkened. "An accident during training. The same day my father died in his hunting mishap." Jake nodded, understanding the full picture now. He reached for his pack, retrieving a small medical kit. As he applied a healing compound to the wound, their training session transformed into something more intimate, a sharing of vulnerabilities, a fragile bridge across their vast differences. A distant sound echoed through the cavernous engine room, a mechanical whirring, punctuated by rhythmic clanking. Zai froze, her head tilted in concentration. "Security drones," she whispered. "Old military models." The red glow of optical sensors penetrated the darkness at the far end of the engine room. One drone, then three, then seven. Their articulated limbs moving with unnerving precision as they advanced through the debris. "They must have detected our heat signatures," Jake said, backing away. Zai unsheathed her blades. "Stay behind me." The drones accelerated, their movements taking on a predatory quality. Zai launched herself at the nearest one, her blades striking with blinding speed. Sparks flew where metal met metal, but the drone's armored shell remained largely intact. It swung a manipulator arm, narrowly missing her head. Another drone circled around, cutting off their retreat. Zai fought with incredible skill, but for every mark she scored on the machines, they responded with increasing coordination. One drone managed to grab her with a mechanical pincer, squeezing with a force that could crush steel. Jake heard the creak of her armor beginning to give. Zai's face contorted with pain and rage as she struggled to free herself. The remaining drones closed in. Jake didn't see enemies. He saw mechanical systems, power sources, sensor arrays, hydraulic actuators, electromagnetic field generators. His mind dissected them, identifying vulnerabilities. He grabbed a length of metal pipe and struck one drone's optical sensor, not to damage it, but to create a specific resonance frequency that temporarily scrambled its targeting systems. The drone staggered, confused. Jake scrambled up a pile of debris. He noticed how the drone's movements synchronized, a networked intelligence. He spotted a broken coolant line and ruptured it, spraying liquid across the floor. Two drones slipped, their balance algorithms failing to compensate quickly enough. Finally, he spotted a damaged power cable hanging from the ceiling. His gaze followed its connection back to a junction box, then to the ship's emergency power grid. These drones were military. They would have electromagnetic shielding, but even shielding had limits. He calculated voltage, resistance, potential electromagnetic pulse radius. His fingers traced the path of the current, seeking the optimal point of intervention. While Zai battled for her life, Jake executed his plan with surgical precision. He created a momentary circuit overload in a secondary panel, diverting power to the damaged cable. Then he grabbed the live end, insulating his hand with fabric torn from his shirt, and swung it against a specific point on the hauler's hull where the metal's conductivity would amplify the effect. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. An electromagnetic pulse ripped through the room, calibrated to the specific frequency of the drone's neural networks. They seized up simultaneously, their sensors going dark as their systems fried. The drone holding Zai released its grip as it deactivated, allowing her to drop to the floor. Jake descended from his perch, wincing at the burns on his hands where the electricity had found paths through the improvised insulation. He approached Zai cautiously. She looked up at him, breathing heavily. For the first time, the contempt in her eyes was replaced by something else. Confusion, perhaps even the faintest hint of reassessment. "You could have run," she said, her voice rougher than usual from the strain of battle. "Why didn't you?" Jake shrugged, inspecting his burned palms. "Instinct, I guess. Some habits are hard to break." Zashi stood, her movements slightly stiff from the damage inflicted by the drone. As she watched Jake tend to his burns, she remarked, "You didn't fight them. You dismantled them. Different approach, same result, Jake replied. Not the same, Zai said quietly. Better. They ventured deeper into the labyrinth of dead ships, something fundamental having shifted between them. A tiny fracture in the wall of hostility. Their new refuge was the captain's bridge of an abandoned research vessel. Panoramic viewports, now cracked but still intact, revealed the wasteland of Xylon stretching to the horizon. Above, stars shone with cold indifference, their light barely penetrating the perpetual haze that surrounded the planet. Jake found a medkit in what had once been the captain's quarters. The supplies were old but usable. He returned to find Saishi examining the control panels of the bridge, searching for anything that might still function. "Let me see your injuries," he said. She turned to him, suspicion flaring in her eyes. "I need no human medicine." "Maybe not," Jake agreed, "but you're favoring your left side. The drone damaged something when it grabbed you?" After a moment of hesitation, Zai approached and allowed him to examine her. Jake worked methodically, his movements professional and precise. A large bruise was forming along her ribcage, the blue of her skin darkening to an almost black hue. "2 cracked ribs," he diagnosed. "Nothing's broken completely, but you need to be careful." He applied a numbing agent and began wrapping a supportive bandage around her torso. The bandage made a soft rustling sound as it unwound, contrasting with the distant groans of the dying ship around them. His fingers worked with practiced efficiency, each movement deliberate and gentle despite the calluses that years of scavenging had built. Zai watched him work, her gaze intense. "Malakosh despises anything broken," she said suddenly. "He calls it waste, trash to be discarded." Jake's hands paused momentarily, then continued their task. "Where I come from, we see it differently." He secured the bandage with a medical adhesive. "The more something's been broken, the more light gets in." Zai frowned, considering his words. A strange perspective. "Maybe," Jake gestured to his knee. "This knee's been broken and badly healed twice. Doesn't work right anymore." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "But it got me here, when I needed to be here. To ruin my ritual." There was less venom in her voice than before. "To find you," Jake corrected quietly. Something shifted in Zai's expression. Not softening exactly, but a momentary vulnerability, quickly masked. She turned her face away. "Why did you leave your people?" she asked unexpectedly. The question caught Jake off guard. He focused on repacking the medical kit, gathering his thoughts before responding. "My last battle," he began, securing the bandage with a medical adhesive. "Our squad was ordered to hold a position that couldn't be defended. I told the commander it was suicide, but he was more concerned with his reputation than our lives." Jake's voice grew distant. "Everyone died." He paused, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. After a long silence, his lips curved in a bitter smile. "The commander got a medal." He stepped back, finished with his work. "After that, I couldn't pretend anymore. The war had stopped being about protecting people or ideals. It was just a slaughterhouse. So I left." Zai was silent for a long moment. "Honor is to die for one's people," she finally said, though it sounded more like a recitation than a conviction. "No," Jake replied quietly. "Honor is to ensure your people don't die in vain." The silence stretched between them, filled with the quiet creaking of the abandoned ship and the distant howl of the Cylon wind. The sound was like sheet metal being slowly twisted, a mournful wail that seemed to carry the voices of all who had died on this graveyard planet. "My father was a great chieftain," Zai said at last, "wise and just." Malakosh always stood in his shadow, burning with envy. Her hands clenched into fists. "I am certain he orchestrated my father's death, though he made it appear as a hunting accident." She moved to the viewport, her silhouette stark against the stars. "The ritual of silence was my only chance to avenge him and prove my right to lead the clan. Now that chance rests in the hands of a human who cannot hold a sword." There was no contempt in her voice now, only a weary resignation that seemed to age her. Jake joined her at the viewport, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Tell me about your clan," he said. "About your laws, your traditions. If I'm going to die for them, I should at least understand them." A hint of surprise flickered across Zai's features. Then slowly she began to speak. She told him of the Steel Wind clan, Warriors who had come to Xylon generations ago when the planet was still green and vital. She spoke of their code of honor, their rituals, their beliefs about life and death. As the artificial night deepened around them, Jake asked questions. Not about fighting techniques, but about the arena where the duel would take place. What model of flagship is it? How are the turbine chambers configured? Where are the emergency protocols located? Jake's questions grew increasingly specific and technical. Zai frowned. Why do you ask these things? Jake smiled grimly. Because I'm not going to win as a warrior, but I might win as an engineer. The turbine chamber of a wrecked flagship had been converted into an arena. Warriors of the Steel Wind Clan stood on technical platforms and catwalks surrounding the central space, their blue faces impassive as they awaited the spectacle of combat. Jake observed them from a shadowed entrance, noting their ritual markings, their weapons, their silent communication. Among the clan leaders stood an elder warrior, his blue skin weathered and scarred from countless battles. This was Torak, once second in command to Zai's father. Unlike the others, whose faces showed only contempt or amusement, Torak's expression remained neutral, evaluative. His eyes, when they fell on Jake, showed not dismissal, but assessment. Zai stood beside Jake, adorned in formal combat attire. Gold and silver embellishments on her armor caught the light, identifying her rank and lineage to all who looked upon her. Remember what we discussed, she said, her voice low. Malakosh is strong but predictable. He will expect you to fight with honor, to face him directly. Jake nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. I won't give him what he expects. Over the past days, he had memorized the schematics of the flagship, its emergency systems, its mechanical vulnerabilities. He had studied the properties of the coolant used in its turbines, the pressure points in its infrastructure, the backup protocols of its ancient computers. Zai placed a hand on his shoulder, the first voluntary physical contact she had initiated. You are not of our kind, Jake, but you have shown courage in your own way. Her eyes met his. Whatever happens, you have earned the right to be remembered in the songs of my people. Before Jake could respond, drums began to echo through the chamber. It was time. Malakosh entered the arena from the opposite side, his massive frame adorned with trophies from previous victories. Bones, metal fragments, and what appeared to be preserved organs. The clan members stamped their feet in a rhythmic cadence, acknowledging his status as a proven warrior. Jake stepped into the light. In his hands was not a ritual blade, but a heavy metal pipe he had salvaged from their refuge. A murmur of confusion rippled through the watching clan, followed by derisive laughter. Malakosh's lips curled in contempt. This is how the great Sai's chosen one fights? With garbage. The officiator, an elder with skin so dark blue it appeared black, raised her hand. Combat continues until submission or death. She lowered her hand. Begin! Malakosh charged, blade describing a perfect arc through the air. Jake didn't attempt to parry. He ran. Laughter erupted from the watching clan. Coward! Malakosh bellowed, pursuing. Jake didn't run randomly. Each step, each position was calculated. He led Malakosh across the arena floor in a precise pattern, drawing him toward a section where the deck plates had corroded, exactly where old maintenance records had indicated structural weakness. The metal gave way under Malakosh's weight. He stumbled, balance momentarily lost. Jake struck, pipe connecting with the warrior's knee. Malakosh roared in pain but recovered quickly. Jake retreated, drawing his opponent toward a specific section of exposed conduits. With a precisely aimed blow, he ruptured a coolant line. Liquid sprayed across the floor, creating a slippery surface directly in Malakosh's path. The warrior's feet slid from under him. He crashed down, pride wounded more than body. Face me, Malakosh demanded, rising, fury distorting his features. From the observation platform, Torak watched intently. Where other clan members saw cowardice, the old warrior recognized strategy. His weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes never left Jake's movements. Jake ducked behind a control panel, fingers moving with surgical precision across ancient controls. Not random button pressing, following the emergency sequence he'd memorized from ship schematics. Ancient fire suppression systems groaned to life. White fog billowed across the arena, reducing visibility to zero. Enough games! Malakosh's voice echoed through the chamber. Metal clattered against the deck. his ritual blade discarded. "I'll tear you apart with my hands." The fog began clearing. Malakosh advanced, massive hands outstretched, murder in his eyes. Jake backed away, pipe suddenly inadequate against the warrior's raw strength. A flash of metal cut through the air. Sai's ritual blade landed at Jake's feet. "The clan's honor is in your hands, human," she called. Jake grabbed the weapon. It felt balanced, perfect, unlike the practice blades, but he knew direct combat meant death. As Malakosh charged, Jake made his choice. He dodged sideways and plunged the blade, not into his enemy, but into the emergency control panel of the adjacent turbine. Not desperation, calculation. He'd identified this panel as the turbine's emergency restart override. His blades severed specific circuits, completed others. The ancient machinery roared to life. Massive blades spun into a blur. A blast of air, at precisely the pressure Jake had calculated, knocked Malakosh off his feet, pinning him against a power grid. The warrior struggled, helpless against the artificial gale. The turbine sputtered and died, power reserves exhausted. Malakosh collapsed to his knees, defeated but alive. Silence fell. All eyes turned to Zai as she descended to the arena floor. By clan law, she now had the right, the obligation, to execute the vanquished challenger. She approached Malakosh, who glared up with hatred and resignation. She raised her remaining blade, edge catching the light. Then with a swift motion, she broke the blade over her knee. The sound of shattering metal echoed through the chamber. "Our clan has lived by vengeance too long," she declared. "It's time we live by reason." She faced the assembled warriors. "Malakosh, son of Vornak, you are exiled from the Steel Wind clan. Leave our territory by next sunrise, never to return on pain of death." Shock rippled through the crowd. Exile, worse than death. A life without clan, without honor, without identity. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Torak stepped forward. The old warrior studied Jake with new eyes. Not acceptance, not yet, but understanding. He struck his fist against his chest armor, the clan's traditional salute of respect. The sound rang like a bell. One by one, other warriors followed. Their salute built from isolated gestures to unified acknowledgement. Malakosh was dragged away, face twisted with rage and disbelief. Zai approached Jake, who held out her broken blade. She shook her head. "Keep it. You've earned clan steel." "I don't understand," Jake said. "According to your law." "The law gave me two paths," Zai interrupted. "Mating or revenge." Her eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "You showed me a third, partnership." Before Jake could process her words, Zai leaned forward and kissed him. Not out of obligation or ritual, but by her own choice. The contact was brief but electric, carrying with it the promise of something neither of them had expected to find in the graveyard of ships. The clan erupted in a cacophony of voices, some expressing approval, others outrage. Zai pulled back, a rare smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "It seems we have much to teach each other, Jake of Earth." "The law gave me two paths," Zai interrupted. "Mating or revenge." Her eyes softened. "You showed me a third partnership." Before Jake could process her words, Zai leaned forward and kissed him. Not from obligation or ritual, but by choice. The contact was brief but electric, carrying a promise neither had expected to find in this graveyard of ships. The clan erupted, some approving, others outraged. Zai pulled back, the ghost of a smile at the corners of her mouth. "We have much to teach each other, Jake of Earth." 1 year later, the Phoenix cut through space, its hull gleaming where once there had been rust. The ship, restored from the wreckage of a research cruiser, hummed with renewed purpose. Through the viewports, stars shone clearly, no longer obscured by Xylon's perpetual haze. The bridge buzzed with activity. Blue-skinned steel wind warriors worked alongside former scavengers of various species, their movements synchronized by shared purpose. The air carried the clean scent of filtered oxygen, mixed with the subtle tang of polish used on the newly restored control surfaces. Conversations in multiple languages created a harmonic backdrop to the steady beeps and hums of functioning technology. Jake adjusted the navigation console, fingers tracing a path through a holographic star chart. His jacket bore the emblem of Chief Engineer alongside clan markings. A gift from Torak. The material was soft against his skin, unlike the rough patch clothing he'd worn as a scavenger. His damaged knee still ached, but the brace Zai's people had crafted for him distributed the weight more evenly, making each step less painful. Unusual mineral readings in that asteroid field, he said, refining the scanner. Worth investigating. From the captain's chair, Zai nodded. Her ceremonial armor had given way to a practical uniform, though her father's dagger remained at her hip. The scar along her ribs had healed, but like Jake's knee, it remained a reminder of what they'd survived together. Plot the course. Standard approach protocols. She addressed a young clan warrior at communications. Inform Science Team 2. Prepare for sample collection. Jake smiled to himself. A year ago, the idea of the Steel Wind clan conducting scientific research would have been unthinkable. Yet Zai had transformed them, guiding them back to her father's vision. Explorers rather than just warriors. They had taken what was broken, ships, traditions, themselves, and built something new and stronger. The turbolift doors opened. A small figure darted onto the bridge. Lyra, their daughter, blue-skinned with Jake's gray eyes. Her footsteps made a light pattering sound against the polished deck. "Father! Look!" She thrust forward a toy built from circuit boards and scrap metal. A crude but recognizable model of the Phoenix. Under her small fingers, the salvaged components had found new purpose, just as the crew had. Jake knelt, examining her creation. The movement caused his knee to protest, but the pain had become familiar, almost a friend. "It's beautiful, Lyra." She pressed a button, making tiny lights flicker along the toy's hull. "It works, just like our ship." Sai joined them, her hand gentle on her daughter's head. Her expression had softened over the year, the warrior's rigid mask giving way to something more complex. Still strong, still proud, but capable of tenderness. The broken pieces of her former self had not been discarded but remade. "She has your mind for machines," Zai said, "and my stubbornness." "Dangerous combination," Jake replied with a smile, the scars on his hands visible as he ruffled Lyra's hair. Lyra stared out the viewport as stars streamed past. "Where are we going?" Zai and Jake exchanged a glance, a look containing a universe of shared experience, of battles fought and won together, of broken things made whole. "Wherever we choose," Zai answered softly. "The gift of freedom." Jake returned to his station, his limp barely noticeable. The console felt warm and responsive under his touch, unlike the cold, dead tech he'd once scavenged. "Course plotted, Captain." "Proceed, engineer," Zai replied. The Phoenix accelerated into the unknown, carrying its crew of former enemies turned family, seeking not conquest but discovery, a future built from the wreckage of the past.